The words echoed like cannon fire through the council's crystalline dome, reverberating off pillars of starlight and glass. I adjusted the drape of my ceremonial sash, shifting uncomfortably in my elevated seat among the Empire's elite. From here, I could see the entirety of the assembly, hundreds of delegates from across the galaxy seated in concentric rings around the central tribunal platform. And there, center stage, stood the humans. Two of them, to be precise. A woman and a man, dressed in those understated earth garments they favored. No armor, no symbols of power, just simple confidence sewn into fabric. The man stood stiffly, formal, unreadable. But the woman, she smiled. A quiet, maddening smile that gave me pause. Why would a species moments away from formal isolation smile? The Galactic Council, boomed High Judicator Drelvar, his voice mechanical and cold, has reviewed Earth's conduct, economic aggression, and refusal to comply with established galactic trade protocols. By vote of 62-4, humanity is hereby denied council membership indefinitely. Further, all trade access is revoked, and military presence is to be limited to within Sol boundaries. Polite applause followed, mostly from sycophants. I did not clap. I watched. The human woman stepped forward. Understood, she said, voice light, like she were thanking someone for tea. No protest, no anger, no desperation, just that smile. I glanced at Admiral Krax beside me. His scaled jaw clenched with satisfaction. He leaned in. I told you, Ambassador. The humans are gutless. No spine, no retaliation, just words and paperwork. Perhaps, I murmured, not entirely convinced. Something gnawed at the edge of my thoughts. A sense of imbalance. The woman turned, motioned to her companion, and the two left the platform without a single backward glance. The chamber buzzed in quiet confusion. Even the Judicator hesitated, as though expecting more. A plea, a rebuttal, something. But the humans were gone before the ceremonial gavel struck. They should have raged. They should have fought. Instead, they smiled. Later that day, over bitter crava tea in the Imperial Diplomatic Lounge, I reviewed the transcripts and reactions. Most analysts declared a victory. The humans, some said, had grown too quickly, too independently. They had refused to share their algorithms. They shielded their economic network behind dense encryption walls. Even their planetary defense AI was rumored to operate on principles no one else understood. Containment was inevitable, said Counselor Threx, a bloated crustacean from the Relax swarm. Better now than when they grow too large. They're not fighters, said another. They're traders, merchants, data miners. Take away their markets, and they'll collapse. I nodded absently, but my eyes drifted to the news feed flickering in the lounge's central holosphere. Breaking, Earth conglomerate withdraws from Galactic Credit Market. Subspace Relay Corp diverts shipping contracts to independent route via the Salian Drift. 3 mid-tier tech worlds join human consortium in experimental trade trial. I frowned. The reports came quickly after that. A ripple, then a wave. By the second day, the human currency, backed by quantum-stabilized asset chains, surged in value against the galactic credit. Some scoffed, called it a temporary fluctuation. But fluctuations don't rewrite ledgers across 10 systems. By day 5, over 24 minor worlds had signed on to Earth's alternative economic system. Faster, fairer they called it. Transparent. Transactions that once took hours now resolved in milliseconds. A week later, Earth announced the launch of its own trade network, the Open Hand Initiative. No central oversight, no fees, fully decentralized, fully secure. I asked my aides to trace the infrastructure. The result? They couldn't. The humans had laid the groundwork years ago, quietly, under the guise of scientific data sharing. The foundation had been there all along. We just hadn't seen it. We had blocked the front door. They built a palace around it. Surely they can't sustain this. Admiral Krax growled as reports came in of abandoned council contracts, crumbling tariffs, and shifting alliances. It's arrogance. No, I said softly, watching a feed of a minor mining colony announcing its switch to Earth system, its strategy. 3 days later, I saw her again. The same woman from the council verdict. She was on a holonet broadcast, standing at a podium on one of Earth's orbital platforms. No military insignia, no political badge, just that same damn smile. To those who turned us away, she said, her voice calm and laced with quiet amusement, we understand. Fear is reasonable when change comes knocking. A pause. Her gaze seemed to pierce the lens. But if you truly believe humans are cowards, she raised her hand, and behind her, a screen lit up with hundreds of planetary names. Then you forgot rule number 1. Silence. A single name lit up on the screen. Ishkar, primary naval outpost of the Southern Expanse. It took a moment for the Council's Defense Board to realize what had happened. Earth hadn't fired a shot, but they'd offered Ishkar a trade partnership with zero military interference, free energy stabilizers, and infrastructure upgrades. The colony accepted. Our colony. Just switch sides. Admiral Krax slammed his clawed fist against the viewing table. This is treason. No, I said, already sinking into dread. This is gravity. The woman on the screen, her name, we'd soon learn, was Captain Elara Jean, tilted her head as if listening to a distant joke. You pushed us out, she said, and gave us the freedom to rewrite the rules. She leaned forward. Thank you. The screen went black. I stood in stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing down on my spine like planetary pull. Thank you. It wasn't surrender. It was release. We had handed the humans exactly what they needed: separation, independence, a cause, and they had thanked us for it. Captain Elara Jean had never spoken in the chamber before. She wasn't even listed in our database of diplomatic personnel. Later we would discover her title was honorary. She was no politician. She was a soldier. The irony would not hit us until much later. The most feared human weapon was not a fleet or a bomb. It was one woman, one soldier, and she hadn't lifted a weapon yet. But she had started a war. A quiet, polite, devastating war. And by the time we realized it, the first pieces of our empire had already been bought, upgraded, and smilingly given back to us under partnership terms. The door we had closed was now a bridge, and we were the ones walking across it, unknowingly, step by step. I sat back, feeling the cold air of inevitability creep into my bones. The humans had smiled. We had laughed. Only now did I understand. The game had begun long before the verdict, and we were already losing. Her name vanished from the registry 2 days after her broadcast. Captain Elara Jean, if that was ever her real designation, ceased to exist in every known galactic database. No trace of birth records, no military assignments, no planetary citizenship. Earth denied all requests for confirmation, offering only a flat statement from their external affairs AI. We do not comment on civilian identities. Civilian? We'd seen her bearing, heard the steel in her voice. That wasn't some merchant's daughter with a flair for public speaking. She had presence, training, and, most damning of all, intent. Yet now she was gone. Not dead, not hidden, gone. I summoned every intelligence cell we had in the inner core, and even then, the answers were unsettling. Surveillance archives from the orbital platform where she'd spoken were mysteriously corrupted. Visual feeds glitched precisely at her departure. Bio-trackers failed to pick up any off-world signatures. Drones dispatched to trace her trail found nothing but polished floors and erased heat signatures. She hadn't left a trace, not even a rumor. She's just one woman, Admiral Krax insisted. Her disappearance is irrelevant. The real threat is the economic encroachment. No, I interrupted, the words tasting like acid. She is the encroachment. There was something primal about her absence, an absence shaped like a blade, deliberately slid between the ribs of our empire. The humans had presented her to us, calm, smiling, and then snatched her away, as if daring us to chase a ghost. I did. I ordered a silent probe, fleet towards Seoul, masked under a diplomatic routine patrol. Not a war action. Not yet. But we had to know where she went. The probe data trickled in slowly, as if the network itself hesitated to cooperate. Earth's orbit was unrecognizable. Fleets of modular civilian transports buzzed between new orbital structures. Massive ring systems labeled commerce platforms and neutral docking habitats. No defense arrays, no visible weapons. But the movements were too precise. Every docking maneuver, every civilian vessel trajectory operated on a system too synchronized to be random, as if it were all running on one shared rhythm. Invisible choreography. I flagged a small ship, an older hauler-class model, making erratic jumps across trade routes between neutral zones. Anomalous behavior. Too methodical to be the work of freelancers, too erratic for corporate logistics. It had no weapons, no official pilot listed, but it showed up near every new human-aligned trade world in the past 12 days. I traced it. I chased it. It disappeared into the Kuiper Gate just before I authorized interception. Gone again. Later, that same day, 3 more colonies declared alignment with Earth's network. Not conquered, not bribed, volunteered. We don't need their protection, one colony governor explained during a local broadcast. We need their systems, their infrastructure. We signed our open-hand contract. Within hours, they'd already mapped our failing energy grid and dispatched automated upgrades. No military, just engineers, just help. He said, help like it was revolutionary. That night, I did something unbecoming of an ambassador of the Empire. I stared at an empty screen for 3 hours, wondering if she was watching. And I remembered her final words. You forgot rule number 1. I asked my cultural analysts what the phrase meant. Most offered shallow interpretations. Military caution, strategic folklore, perhaps even religious reference. One assistant, young, Terran-educated, said quietly, it's not what she said. It's the tone. On Earth, that phrase means you made a mistake so obvious, we don't need to retaliate. You've already lost. Lost. The Empire we believe could not lose. But now we were bleeding territory, allies, influence. Not by fire, not by war, but by departure. World relieving, not fleeing. Not running. Choosing. That terrified me more than invasion. I convened a private council. No military, no posturing politicians. Just analysts, linguists, and sociologists. The thinkers we normally left buried beneath bureaucracy. Their conclusion was unsettling in its simplicity. The humans weaponized trust. What does that mean? I asked, irritated by their vagueness. They offer systems, one said, that adapt instantly. Machines that listen. AI that speaks like a neighbor, not a master. Economic tools that respond to need, not greed. And they do it without flags, without threats, without fanfare. They fill voids, another added, and then disappear like ghosts. Like her. And still, I could not find her. Alara Jean, if that was ever her name, remained untraceable. But her effect grew daily. Ishkar declared economic independence within one cycle of joining the human system. Next came Valine Prime, a central logistics node in the southern corridor. Then came Zuroth, a mining world infamous for its union riots, now stabilized, running on a newly installed Terran AI. Each colony left the Empire with a public broadcast of thanks. Not protest, not rebellion. Thanks. I woke one night from a dream I could not shake. I stood in the council chamber again. Alara stood before us, but this time she said nothing. She only watched as the stars outside the dome blinked out, one by one. I woke in cold silence, and I understood something deep, instinctive, and unshakable. The woman hadn't vanished. She'd multiplied. Every system she touched, every colony she liberated with an invisible offer, became another version of her. Not in form, but in action. Every data point, every contract, every optimization executed without fanfare or glory carried her signature. Relentless precision, quiet confidence, smiling inevitability. I left my post for the first time in a decade and returned to the Empire's core. Not to resign, to warn. But by the time I arrived, the Chancellor's Hall was already preparing for a new session. Subject of discussion? An unexpected rise in internal unrest. Not protests, not demands, just disappearances. Ships, assets, governors, quietly switching sides. With no trace. I stared at the growing list, and then at the final note scribbled at the bottom of the agenda. Open-hand contracts discovered inside core worlds. Investigate possible infiltration. I closed the datapad and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because it was funny, but because she'd already arrived. They were the last ones we expected to defect. The cowards. That was what we called them in whispers and classified footnotes. 32 systems in the outer spiral, colonized early during the expansion era, yet perpetually inert. Technologically stagnant, culturally insular. Their representatives rarely spoke during Senate sessions. When they did, it was always some plea for neutrality, for non-engagement, for status quo. They never sent ships to support our wars. Never contributed more than the minimal tax and census data. When pirates raided their cargo routes, they paid them off instead of requesting imperial escort. When civil wars sparked in nearby sectors, they sealed their borders and said nothing. We tolerated them, barely. And now they were gone. Not one by one, but all at once. In a single solar cycle, every one of the 32 signed Earth's open-hand charter. The same day, coordinated, deliberate, public. Their statements shared identical phrasing, differing only in accent and inflection. We are not defecting. We are choosing a system that listens. Those words echoed across our private channels like a hammer striking bone. Our military intelligence panicked. Surely it was a coup, a coordinated cyberstrike. No single culture group, let alone 32 loosely aligned ones, could act with such symmetry. Our analysts scrambled through encrypted threads, background radiation, even psychic telemetry. But the answer was simpler. They'd been watching. Earth never contacted them directly. Instead, they deployed passive information beacons near the 32's borders, public files, open access code bases, optimization tutorials. No propaganda, no recruitment, just answers to problems those worlds had suffered for generations. And the cowards, silent, unassuming, had read every byte. We found private community forums on those planets filled with decoded Terran engineering logs, economic scripts adapted into local dialects, and educational modules embedded into nursery AI. It wasn't Earth that recruited them. It was curiosity. One particular transcript from a planetary administrator named Salen, you're on Juna Prime, haunted me for days. They never demanded allegiance. They never asked for tribute. They just made it easier to feed our people, light our homes, and speak to one another without layers of bureaucracy. What kind of empire makes you beg for permission to fix a broken water grid, but offers no help when it collapses? I read it twice, then a third time. He was right. When we first colonized the spiral, we imposed the doctrine of efficient integration. One code of law, one economic model, one language algorithm. It saved us time, resources, but it buried the voices of every minor world under a single, grinding weight. The cowards had survived by staying quiet. Now they were thriving by speaking back, through Earth's tools. And Earth had not even raised a flag. One of my aides, a sharp-witted linguist from Corvallis, handed me a data chip labeled Sublayer Humor Index. I raised a brow. We're doing comedy analysis now. She nodded. Satire is one of the first signs of ideological comfort. The cowards used to fear us. Now they're making jokes. I loaded the index. It contained memes, satirical cartoons, playful skits, all of them ridiculing our endless ceremonies, our obsession with hierarchy, our inability to adapt without a council vote. One image in particular froze me mid-breath. A cartoon of our Grand Marshal standing before a galaxy map labeled Imperial Threat Zones. Every zone glowed red. Behind him, a human child quietly replaced the map with a blueprint for water purification, smiling while the Marshal kept yelling at shadows. Beneath the image, a caption. While they roared, we repaired. They weren't cowards anymore. They were builders. I summoned the Senate subcommittee on peripheral affairs. When they arrived, 7 rotund bureaucrats and 2 generals too old to hold a weapon, I presented the case. This is not a rebellion. This is an alternative. And it's working. Predictably, they scoffed. Senator Grovak, flushed, wheezing, slammed a claw against the table. We have 3 fleets in that sector. They'll remind those parasites who gave them stars to live under. They didn't take stars, I said coldly. They just stopped asking us for permission to shine. Grovok sneered. You're romanticizing weakness. No, I replied. I'm acknowledging that weakness, when shared and supported, becomes resilience. Earth didn't conquer them. They enabled them. That word, enabled, sank into the chamber like poison. The empire was built on dominance, on enforced unity. We taught obedience as virtue and called improvisation heresy. But humans, they celebrated improvisation. They turned every glitch into a feature, every failure into a lesson. And they gave others the tools to do the same. In response to the cowards' alignment, we imposed sanctions. We expected them to crumble under economic pressure. Instead, they flourished. Cargo traffic to those systems doubled within a week. Earth's network rerouted trade, leveraging hybrid AI to optimize resource flow. Our tariffs became irrelevant. Our blockades, laughable. Their planetary marketplaces buzzed with digital contracts settled in minutes, not months. They called it trust engineering, a system where contracts weren't enforced by fear, but by mutual gain. I watched their growth through gritted fangs. They never fought us, never fired a shot, and yet they were winning. One midnight, after another failed session of emergency hearings, I took a shuttle to the observation tower on Grell Station, where the Empire's maps were projected in real time. I stood alone, staring at the blinking light clusters that marked our domains. Every day, they dimmed. One by one, systems stopped responding to pings. Not hostile, not hacked, just disconnected, not conquered, chosen away. I pulled up a private channel. Encrypted, old tech. No AI relays. And I sent a message. To Ilara Jean. Subject, a question. You said we forgot rule number 1. I thought you meant don't provoke Earth. But I see now. Rule number 1 was, don't force people to choose between fear and dignity. They'll choose dignity. Even the cowards. I didn't expect a reply. But 10 minutes later, a blinking blue light. From unknown sender. Subject, response. There are no cowards. Only people waiting for a better option. We just show them the door. I closed the message. Slowly, quietly. Then I turned back to the map and saw another 3 stars fade to gray. She didn't need armies. She had momentum. They called for another summit. Not to negotiate, but to announce. It was held aboard the former Imperial Trade Nexus, Relax Station, now rebranded as Unity Point under Earth's stewardship. Once, it pulsed with the traffic of tribute convoys and tax auditors. Now it thrummed with engineers, artists, diplomats, and something we had never seen in any Empire-held station. Children. Human ones, alien ones, laughing together in a corridor where executions had once taken place. I arrived not as a commander, but as a witness. Unarmed, undignified by our former standards. My formal title, Vigilant of the Eastern Arm, meant nothing here. No one bowed. No one saluted. The humans simply nodded, as if to say, you're late, but not unwelcome. I was escorted by a boy no older than 10 cycles. Human, curious-eyed. He asked me questions along the route. Is it true your species can see ultraviolet? Yes. Cool. Do your people dream in color? That's sad, he said sincerely. Dreams are where I do my best thinking. He walked beside me as if I were just another guest, not the last high-ranking relic of a dying empire. At the summit hall, there were no thrones, just circles. Transparent panels curved into interlocking seats, emphasizing equality. In the center stood the woman, Ilara Jean. She wore no armor, no insignia, no weapon. Only a thin black coat with a silver pin. Earth's open hand, palm forward, 5 fingers curved like a constellation. I expected her to begin with rhetoric, a demand, a warning. Instead, she looked at us, me, and simply said, "Do you know what a tipping point is?" Silence stretched. "It's the moment a system can no longer return to its previous state," she continued. "When momentum favors change, not order. You try to kill a girl in public, thinking it would remind the galaxy who's in charge. But you reminded them of something else." She paced slowly, her voice steady. "You reminded them they weren't. that they traded freedom for bureaucracy, dignity for compliance. And in that moment, they remembered what we never forgot. Rule number 1. I exhaled through clenched mandibles. Don't provoke Earth. She smiled, but without humor. No. Rule number 1. The system exists to serve the people, not the other way around. A low murmur spread across the chamber. Delegates from defected systems nodded. Even a few undecided worlds sat forward, eyes glinting with thought. Alara turned to a projection behind her. Not maps, not fleets. Data. Infant mortality curves. Literacy surges. Trade routes mapped like neural networks. Food production units scaled to per capita efficiency. The numbers told a story more damning than any weapon. Within one cycle of joining us, she said, every former imperial system saw measurable improvement in quality of life. Not because we imposed new systems, but because we removed the permission structures that delayed everything. Bureaucracy is a dam, necessary for flow control. But your empire turned it into a wall. A Sarnathi delegate raised a spine limb. And what do you propose? That we abandon order for chaos. Alara looked at him gently. No, I propose we abandon control for collaboration. Her hand hovered over a switch. Which brings us to today's question. With a flick, the screen changed. Join US or vanish. 3 words. Calm, clear, absolute. It wasn't a threat. It was an observation. This is not war, she said softly. War is when both sides have leverage. This is entropy. You're clinging to a structure that no longer supports its weight. Our offer is simple. Join the open hand. Retain your culture, your voice, your systems, but align with the principles of dignity, access, and transparency. No tribute, no conquest, just shared momentum. Another delegate, this one from the few still loyal border sectors, stood sharply. And if we refuse? She shrugged. You'll vanish. Gasps rippled, but I understood what she meant. Not die, not be destroyed, just fade, forgotten, left behind as irrelevant, inefficient, inert. The worst fate for any civilization. A low chime sounded. The boy who escorted me earlier stepped into the hall, holding a small holopad. He handed it to Alara. She read it, nodded, and said, Juna Prime reports full stabilization of their water infrastructure. 37% surplus projected by next quarter. They're exporting clean tech now. Another chime. Another report. Sorrel and Minor has developed a language-agnostic education program. 5 new dialects standardized. Literacy at 91%. One by one, they came in. Worlds once mocked for weakness, now leading in areas we never invested in. The message was clear. Earth was not conquering us. They were surpassing us. Quietly, kindly, and completely. I stood slowly. My voice, once capable of silencing entire war councils, now trembled with something dangerously close to respect. You called this summit to give us a choice. But in truth, the choice was made long ago, wasn't it? Alara nodded once. The galaxy just took longer to notice. I looked around, at delegates who no longer feared my gaze, at numbers that could not be negotiated with, at children who asked why instead of obeying how. I remember the girl, the one we executed, her name, her final words, the clarity in her eyes as she faced a fate we thought would break humanity's spirit. She had not broken. We had. I turned to Alara. Then let me speak as the last voice of the Empire. She inclined her head. There will be no more resistance. No more sanctions. No more pretending we still hold the future. I will return to the core, not to command, but to inform. The Empire is over. I expected applause. There was none. Only quiet understanding. A dignity we had rarely afforded others. Alara extended a hand. Not for show. For alliance. I took it. And in that moment, everything that came before became irrelevant. The maps would change. The language would shift. But what mattered was this.